And then, as I said earlier, we have Mr. Arai, Satoru Arai from Hiroshima, that he's one of the original, he's the original founder of the group. So it's an honor to have. And then we have Miss Hiroko Nakano as well. So.
Hello, I'd like to welcome everybody to the first Zoom talk of the new academic year for San Diego Independent Scholars, SDIS. I'd like to welcome both our members and especially for this meeting, our guests, our many guests, Japanese American guests, and you're so welcome. And as Dorothy pointed out, we're honored to have you here. And we certainly hope to hear from you later on after the talk during the question and answer period. I'm sure we'll learn a great deal. Before introducing our speaker today, I do want to note to our members that they should have received notification from Edwina Curtis, our treasurer, that it's time for dues payments for the year. Actually, it's late for dues payments for the year, but we've just developed a whole new technology on the mechanism where we've updated, we've modernized. So this year, if you receive that material, you'll see that you can still pay by check, just mailing in your check. But we also have this new technology, which is pretty good for our organization. The material you received explains that you could also go online, push a few buttons, following the instructions, sign up and pay by credit card or PayPal. So I hope a number of you will be adventurous and go and do that. I should say that a number of people contributed to our ability to develop this whole new payment method, contribution method. But I'd like to give a special thanks to Don Bamber, who plowed through all the obstacles and worked successfully with our webmaster to accomplish the goal. So thank you, Don.
Well, also Dorothy Parker and Edwina Curtis.
Indeed, okay. I'd also like to mention that we do have speakers lined up for October and November. As you all know, the meetings, our speaker meetings are on the third Saturday of the month at 1:30. In October, Dr. Faye Gersh, who founded and led the Hemlock Society of San Diego for many years, and was a past president of the National Hemlock Society, will speak on October 16th on the worldwide search for a peaceful death, exploring laws for assisted dying in other parts of the world. And she'll also mention the documents necessary to achieve your end-of-life wishes. In November, Dr. Monty Marshall, a retired professor of geological sciences at SDSU, who gave us the wonderful talk on his passionate avocation, astronomy, last season, will speak to us again on November 20th, this time on one of his professional areas of research, plate tectonics, the advent of which profoundly changed our understanding of the planet Earth. Okay. Our speaker today is Dr. Gloria R. Montebruno Saller, who is an independent research scholar in Japan studies. She's also a new member of SDIS, and she's on the board of the national, or now presently international, Coalition of Independent Scholars, NCIS. She was born in Italy, moved to the United States to pursue her doctoral degree in East Asian languages and cultures at the University of Southern California, from where she received her doctoral degree. She taught Japanese language and culture courses, women's studies, and global study courses at the University of Southern California, California State University, Long Beach, California State University, Fullerton, University of California, Riverside, and the University of Laverne. She presented her research at conferences worldwide and published her works in several academic journals. Dr. Montebruno Saller's current research focuses on the history of Japanese and Japanese American atomic bomb survivors residing in the United States and their social activism through the Committee on Atomic Bomb Survivors United States, that's acronym CAPSUS, and ASA, the American Society of Hiroshima, Nagasaki A-bomb survivors. She serves as director and historian of the American Society of Hiroshima, Nagasaki A-bomb survivors in Los Angeles, California. Currently, she is writing her book, Japanese American Citizens as Survivors of the Atomic Bombing of Hiroshima, which will be published by Routledge by the end of 2022, hopefully.
Oh.
And today she'll speak to us on American citizens as survivors of the Hiroshima atomic bomb, adding a chapter to the history of the United States. Dr. Montebruno Saller.
Thank
When
you.
I mute everyone, you're going to have to unmute yourself, Gloria.
Okay, then I'll wait a second. Okay, let me share my screen, and this way we can get started. And so thank you so much for having me here today and allow me to introduce my research work. The reason I chose this title is because we do not have in the history of the United States a chapter on those American citizens that happened to be in Japan, and more specifically in Hiroshima. And I explain why Hiroshima in a moment, and some in Nagasaki at the end of World War II. This chapter of history, as a matter of fact, is a chapter that belongs to not only to the history of the United States, but to the history of the America West, the history of Asian Americans in the United States, the history of Japan, transnational and trans-Pacific history, and of course, world history. Although some parts of this story has been told and conveyed in books published by university presses, and thus not for consumption by the general public, most of what I'm going to introduce today has not seen the light in textbooks used by high school students in the United States or around the world. It is a story with plenty of challenges. It is a story whose characters cross national and cultural borders, geographical and political borders. At a time when flying from one continent to another was prohibitively expensive, when communications was limited to snail mail, hurried phone calls, and in-person gatherings, a group of individuals who had experienced war and life on two continents came together and made history. In their shared experience with the atomic bomb, they found a peculiar and common bond and committed to a project that unfortunately was doomed from day one. So how did a group of individuals with limited English language skills manage to get their plight to the California legislature and then to the US Congress? So what is that we know? What is that is in the history books, the US history books? We know about the immigration histories from Japan to the United States via Hawaii. We know about the history of the first, second generation of Japanese Americans that were in Hawaii and then they were in the West Coast for their farmland. The history books, of course, convey the Gentleman's Agreement of 1907. They touch upon the Immigration Act of 1924 and the segregation policies. Of course, there is plenty that's been said and written about Pearl Harbor, and then the internment of the Japanese Americans. The majority of the Japanese that came to the United States would go to Hawaii or to the West Coast of the United States. But so what is that it's missing from the United States, from the American history books? What's missing is the history of those American citizens of Japanese ancestry, second and third generation, who moved to Japan as children between 1924 and 1941, with or without their parents. What is missing is the history of those 55,000 Japanese American citizens that left the United States before 1941, moved to Japan or Southeast Asia. And this is the topic of Professor Michael Jing's forthcoming book, and he's with us today as well. What is missing is the story of those 12,000, possibly 15,000 American citizens of Japanese ancestry. They were in Hiroshima Prefecture, and they were in the city of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. What's missing is the story of how they returned to the United States, how they organized into the nonprofit Coalition of Atomic Bomb Survivors in 1971, how they took their plight to the California legislature and then to the US Congress in 1974 and 1978, how they were able to start the biannual medical examinations from Japan in 1977, and then the history that came after the association split and the focus being on peace literature. So one of the things that I was curious from the very beginning was, when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who knew that there were American citizens on the ground? And the United States Strategic Bombing Survey, which was released on June 30, 1946, is probably the only document that acknowledges that there were Japanese Americans on the ground. So this was after the fact. The question that always kind of intrigued me was, like, who knew that there were American citizens on the ground? They knew there were American military personnel, there were American prisoners of war, but who knew? And the reason was, had they known, especially in light of the radiation issue that this bomb would, unleash, would they have changed their mind? But of course, it was the wrong question to ask. So I started asking, who knew about radiation before August 6, 1945? And while the pre-Hiroshima understanding of radiation was far from perfect, there had been human and animal studies conducted by scientists and physicians that were attached to the Manhattan Project during the war. But while wartime studies greatly advanced knowledge of radiation effects, this knowledge was compartmentalized and marginalized in what was the American decision to drop the atomic bomb. So if Truman and Stimson and all the people in the decision room had known about it, would they have changed their mind about using the bomb? Well, what we know is that General Groves, who was the person in charge of the Manhattan Project, I don't think it would have made a difference, because in a meeting on July 3rd, 1945, he announced and said no damaging effects are anticipated on the ground from radioactive material. And if we think we could move troops through the area immediately, preferably by motor, but on foot if desired. So he was willing to send American military personnel on the ground. And so, as I say, although there was access to this research, it would have not made a difference at that point. I guess that the most shocking and controversial statement came in November 1945, when the Special Committee on Atomic Energy launched the hearings on the Manhattan Project and the use of the atomic bomb. And General Groves, when he was interviewed, he downplayed the number of radiation casualties and stated that there was nothing horrible in the way these individuals succumbed to radiation. As I understand it from the doctors, it is a very pleasant way to die. And so this show a total disregard for human life and a uniquely focus on the success of the Manhattan Project, which seemed to guide General Groves' agenda. He knew about radiation poisoning and radiation sickness and decided not only to ignore it, but it's been suggested that he prevented such information to reach President Truman, and it is possible that he might have misled Stimson as well. Moreover, what this proves is that regardless of who was going to be on the ground, the bomb had to be used. Later in time, in the years, President Truman acknowledged that he never received a briefing on radiation, and that accordingly, based on the information that he had no reason to raise question about its possible lingering effects. So this is a lot that needs to be taken in. After the bomb was dropped, the Japanese doctors on the ground, those few that had remained, realized that they were confronted with something different. And so Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, which was the first doctor on the ground that, although he was hurt himself, he started treating the survivors. On August 26, 1945, he published the notice regarding radiation sickness. And he made a list of what the short-term symptoms and long-term symptoms were going to be. Short-term symptoms was nausea, vomiting, malaise, diarrhea, loss of hair, fever, and hemorrhaging. Long-term effects, cataracts, leukemia, cancers, risk of mental retardation and microcephaly for in utero children, possible genetic effect to future generation. As far as the short-term symptoms of radiation sickness, we can see them in this picture. This picture it was shared with me by Mr. Howard Kakita. He is a Japanese-American atomic bomb survivor. He's the one on the right. On the left is his brother Kenny, and in the middle is his grandfather. The grandfather passed away about a year later from radiation, from the symptoms of radiation sickness. So who are the atomic bomb survivors in the United States? They are American citizens of Japanese ancestry, what today we will call Japanese American citizen. They are Nisei, second generation, or Sansei, third generation. They are Japanese national residing in the United States, green card holders, and they are naturalized Japanese nationals. So people that moved to the United States, they possibly got married to US citizens, or that after leaving for a long time decided to take the Japanese American citizenship. So these are some of the individuals that I will discuss today, whose names you have already heard. You know, Mr. Sarashina Junji, which is the picture up here on the left corner of my presentation. Mr. Arai, that I introduced to you as the founder of CABS, which is portrayed here in front of the atomic bomb dome. And others, and say I will introduce some of this during my presentation. So, but these individuals slowly, after the war, trickled back into the United States. As a matter of fact, as American citizens, they had to prove that they were American citizens before they could return to the United States. So they started coming back to the United States around 1947. What was happening at the time was that the American government was very busy testing all this nuclear material, and the Marshall Islands had become the place where eventually they totaled about 67 atomic detonations. And it happened that the worst one of them was the March 1st, 1954, which was the Castle Bravo thermonuclear weapon, which was tested at the Bikini Atoll. And it happened to irradiate the Japanese tuna fishing boat, the fishing vessel Lucky Dragon number 5. In a sense, this was also the beginning in Japan about radiation and poisoning, radiation sickness. And in a way, it got the Japanese government to start enacting legislation in regard to the medical help of atomic bomb survivors. So in 1957, when the Atomic Bomb Survivors Special Medical Care Bill was enacted in Japan, there were some Japanese Americans that were still in Japan at the time. And although they were American citizens, they were not eligible for the medical care provided under this legislation. What is interesting for the purpose of this presentation is to understand that this special medical care law provided the classification of atomic bomb survivors. Who were they? So because the vast majority of Japanese American that were exposed to the atomic bomb were in the city of Hiroshima, I'm going to focus on this specific classification. So atomic bomb survivors were those individuals in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and within the 2.5 kilometer radius from the hypocenter, from where the bomb was detonated. Or they were those individuals that entered the city within 2 weeks after the detonation and stayed within the 2.5 kilometer radius. And this is the issue of, residual radiation. Or they were individuals that were exposed to radiation fallout, the black rain, or they were in utero at the time of the bombing, which means that the mothers were pregnant. As of March 2020, the Japanese government has recognized 650,000 people as hibakusha, which is the Japanese term for atomic bomb survivors, and 136,682 were still alive as of March 2020, as of August, reported by the Japanese newspaper on August 4, 2020, and mostly are Japanese. So in Japan, in order to be able to have access to this medical care, they had to qualify as atomic bomb survivors, and then they were given an atomic bomb certificate that they had to show at the time of the medical examinations. As I say, when it was enacted in 1957 and 1960, foreign nationals who were in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 were not eligible to apply for this. The survivors, though, that were in Japan, and especially the Japanese survivors that later moved to the United States, were aware of all this legislation that was taking place in Japan. And so when they moved to the United States, they realized that there was a need for the survivors to obtain medical assistance. And so in here you see, in a way, the chronology or the trajectory of the social activism of the atomic bomb survivors in North America. And they started with identifying the social issues and the reason for which they were asking for medical help to deal with some of the illnesses they were being afflicted with. They mobilized the people and organized into the Coalition of Atomic Bomb Survivors. Then they started to spread the message through the media, of course, here in California, in North America, through the Japanese American bilingual newspaper, the Rafo Shinpo, but also the Los Angeles Times. They reached out to the medical community and political representatives, both in the United States and in Japan. They were able to take the fight to the state, the California legislature, and then to the nation as well. Although they failed at the national level here in the United States to obtain any kind of recognition from the American government, they did obtain assistance from the Japanese government, and specifically the Hiroshima prefectural government. When the coalitions broke apart, they split, the focus became on peace education through social engagement. And so it all started in a way in 1965. What the atomic bomb survivors had at the time, they had recognized that they were afflicted by certain kind of medical conditions. But at the beginning, in 1965, when this announcement appeared in the Rafu Shimpo and the Kaishu Mainichi, which were the Japanese American newspaper at the time, was about just a gathering of coming together of individuals just to share their experiences. And it probably was about trying to understand that if everybody was going through the same issues when it came to going to visit a doctor and trying to explain what is it that they were afflicted with. Because the truth was that for some of them, they didn't have the vocabulary to explain what it was that was afflicting them. Most of them were not English-speaking people. They had been raised in Japan. They had spent a lot of time in Japan. Their formative years was in Japan. So there was also this language barrier among the doctors and the patients, the atomic bomb survivor. So Okai Tomoe and Shimoda Kaname were the individual, along with Mr. Arai Satoru, were the ones that in a way spearheaded the movement of trying to get atomic bomb survivors that lived in the Southern California area together and share what they all went through. The first meeting of the Hibakusha Friendship Group, the Atomic Bomb Survivor Friendship Group, took place on August 12, 1965. So for those of you that are expert in American history, you know that there was a very peculiar time. Few people, as a matter of fact, were able to attend this meeting in the city of Pasadena because it was the day after a riot broke out in the Watts, and then they went on for 6 days. Traffic was impacted. Most of the survivors lived in the South Bay, so in Orange County, Long Beach area, Palos Verdes, Torrance. And so they really didn't want to get on the road to drive to Pasadena where this meeting was taking place. Because it was taking place in Pasadena, few people were able to attend. As you can see from the slide on the screen, what they needed, what they wanted was this friendship group of people to share the experience of the bomb. Some of them wanted this call for world peace, and others wanted a medical protection. But they did realize from the outset that if medical attention was to be arranged, the only path was to bring specialists from Hiroshima. There was definitely no hope, especially in 1965, to obtain medical care from the United States. So Okai Tomoe was one of the founders of the group, and she really rallied support from the Hiroshima mayors in 1967, and she requested help. She requested the authorities to recruit atomic bomb members, to bring their plight to the attention even of the Japanese people, and trying to really see if anything could happen, could take place. The people involved in this group, and let's say this is 1967, it was very expensive to fly back and forth. Everything that was happening in a slow motion for us, that we are so used, as a matter of fact, to just send an email, grab the phone, or do a video conference, as we've been doing lately. This took a long time, and there were people on the ground in Los Angeles that were doing the footwork, and there were people on the ground in Hiroshima that were using all their network connections, all the people that they knew, to really trying to obtain all the help they could to bring the Japanese doctors to the United States, and trying to get at least to understand what was the illnesses that they were afflicted with. So the Committee of Atomic Bomb Survivors in the United States of America officially was founded in October 1971. And one of the articles in their constitution was that one of the goals of the group was to obtain this medical examination, the appearance of Japanese doctors to come to the United States and help the survivors understand what it was that was happening to them physically, and of course also at an emotional level. So this is a very interesting picture from 1974, and it shows some of the individuals that were extremely involved at the very beginning. So from the left, if you look at the left of the picture, that's Mr. Arai Satoru Ernest. He was one of the original founder of the group. On his to the right of him is Dr. Thomas Noguchi. Dr. Noguchi was the medical examiner of Los Angeles. Right to the right of Mr. Noguchi is Miss Okai Tomoe, also the founder of CABS. Then to the right of the African-American gentleman, which I have yet to identify, is Miss Kaz Sueshi, which was one of the founder also of CABS and the future president of ASA. Behind Ms. Sueshi is Mr. Kanji Kuramoto, who for almost 25 years was the president of CABS. He passed away in 2003, and so I'm still looking at documents and correspondence that he had with individuals in the United States and in Japan, as he was a very influential person, especially when it came to the medical examinations. So this was, say, the group of individuals that became extremely involved with the process of obtaining help for their medical and mental affliction. The association accomplishments in reality were three, and they were major. The first one was the publication and of the hearing by the Senate Subcommittee on Medical Education and Health Needs, which gathered on May 4, 1974 in Los Angeles and heard about the health problems of atomic bomb survivors. And the next one was the hearings by the Subcommittee on Administrative Law and Governmental Relations, also on the possibility of having some funds given to these atomic bomb survivors residing in North America, especially in the United States, to help them with their medical bills. And this was in 1978. And the third document is a document that was produced by the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee, which was a study of the atomic bomb survivors that resided in the United States. So I'm going to go through this document. The May 4th hearing in 1974 in Los Angeles was really an attempt by several individuals on the political level and the medical level to bring the discussion about what is that this individual needed. So Dr. Noguchi was actually the individual that was the most involved with individual from Japan and from the United States, that he was trying to explain to them what is that these people needed. At the time, 5 survivors provided the testimony: Mr. Arai, Mrs. Tomoe Okai, Mr. Kuramoto, Ms. Sueshi, and Mrs. Shigeko Morimoto, although her statement was read by her husband, George. And what happened was that the committee intended to explore the possibility of using existing publicly funded program to assist the survivors in obtaining the treatment they needed until a national program was being implemented. As Dr. Noguchi stated at the time, we are fully aware that the Japanese American physicians and the physicians in the US are expert in the understanding of radiation injuries, but understanding of the actual care of Japanese survivor is an extremely important factor. So the survivors would talk about how they felt dismissed by the medical personnel here in the United States when they were describing, their symptoms, or even sometimes they were to say, I'm an atomic bomb survivor. Some people were called not liars, but it's like, what are you talking about? Then there was the issue of the fact that when some people did come forward and declared officially and publicly that they were atomic bomb survivors, the health insurance here in the United States was denied to them. So they lost their coverage. But as one of the doctor acknowledged at the time, there was this psychological debilitation, the fact that they were in constant fear of the possible appearance of radiation-induced illnesses. And there was this fear that the transmission of this constant acute anxiety to spouses and other family members was impacting their family. In other words, these individuals were living with the anxiety of anticipating the radiation-induced illness that could become debilitating. Although the American doctors tended to dismiss the symptoms conveyed by the atomic bomb survivor as psychosomatic in nature or due to the aging process, and they would discount the possible role of the atomic bomb exposure, this document that was produced in 1974 was not only good, it was a great accomplishment, and it obtained coverage in the media. So the article that was published on November 13, 1974 addresses, for example, the social stigma that was associated with being atomic bomb survivors. It is a true fact that even among the Japanese Americans in the United States, they wouldn't, advertise that they were atomic bomb survivors. They remained very private. This article points to how these survivors were trying to activate all their networks to raise awareness. And in a way, this was the time when they became public in their quest. In 1978, the hearings on possible payments to the atomic bomb survivors, this was part of the U.S. congressional hearings. It didn't pass. It died in the Congress, in the House committee. It was never advanced. Of course, Mr. Kuramoto, who was the president at the time, was extremely displeased. But the truth was that although they had a loss from the United States, they were able in 1977 to start those medical examinations with the doctors, with this medical ambassadors in a way that they were coming from Hiroshima prefecture, and they were providing the help that they needed. And before I move on to the discussion of the medical examinations, I want to take a look at the document that was produced by Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And this was a survey of radiation doses that was received by atomic bomb survivors residing in the United States. So the people that are listed here, Dr. of course, George Kerr was the health physics division of Oak Ridge. But Dr. Hiroyaki Yamada, he was the doctor at the Radiation Effect Research Foundation in Japan, which this foundation was formerly called the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, who had been asked by the mayor of Hiroshima and then by the survivors in California, in North America, to conduct a study to really assess what is that these individuals needed. And so they were able to recruit about 300 of the estimated 500 to 750 survivors of the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki that reside in the United States. And they applied all the criteria that had been used for the survivors in Japan to understand what their location was geographically, where were they when the bomb was detonated, and to understand what kind of dose of radiation they were exposed to. This document actually, the study was commissioned in support of the bills that we just looked at for 1974. So of the 300 survivors, 289 had been in the city of Hiroshima and 121 had been in the city of Nagasaki. The fact that the majority came from Hiroshima is due to the fact that the majority of individuals that immigrated to the United States came from the Hiroshima prefecture. And so of this survivors, 200 were in Southern California, 150 in Northern California, 150 in Hawaii. It's a very short report that was published. The data that was put together, in a sense, wasn't that difficult to do, but very in-depth interviews were conducted by the doctors. And so it took me a long time to obtain this, this report. But I was finally able to obtain it. And it's interesting to see the kind of how they apply the findings from the studies that had been conducted by the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission in both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and apply it to the individuals that were residing in North America. But so, as I said earlier, though, the medical examination, what in Japanese are called the medical expeditions, were established in 1977. So what happens during these medical examinations, which take place every other year, is that a group of doctors from the Hiroshima Prefecture Medical Association, Nagasaki Prefecture Medical Association, arrived to the United States, North America, because at the beginning also the survivors in Canada were included. And then from 1981, people in Hawaii will be included as well, and spend some time. Back then, they would spend about 2 weeks conducting medical examinations, but they could do this only under the sponsorship, for example, of the Los Angeles County Medical Association or the San Francisco County Medical Association, because the truth is that, and this was one of the stickiest points, was that doctors from abroad, Japanese doctors, could not practice medicine in the United States. So they had to find a way to be able to do that. And so the sponsorship from the different American medical association was very important for this project to be successful. And of course, when this starts, the survivors start feeling like they are being taken care. I have access to all of the reports that were published after all the medical examinations, and the last one was published in 2017. And I will introduce some of the data that was collected at the time. But all the agencies that will be involved in this process, as you can see here, are several. So the Radiation Effect Research Foundation will send representatives from Nagasaki and Hiroshima to assist during these medical examinations. Of course, the Hiroshima Prefecture Medical Association will be highly represented. The Ministry of Health and Welfare, which is the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, what will be known later on, Hiroshima Prefecture and City Government, and then later on, the Hiroshima International Council for Healthcare of the Radiation Exposed, which is abbreviated as HICARE, and the different U.S. counties medical association. So this is a big project. And again, this was put together by a group of individuals that will rely on snail mail and later on faxes, will coordinate at one point up to 1,200 individuals to be part of this process. So when I gathered all the reports from the medical examinations, I was able to look at how many were in the United States. As you recall, I said at the beginning that to be an atomic bomb survivors, to be classified as an atomic bomb survivors, they had to fall into certain categories, and they had to have witnesses to be able to have access to the atomic bomb certificate, what in this slide is called the health handbook holders. The people in the United States or in Canada, unless they would have been able to go back to Japan, they could not apply at the beginning, especially in 1977, they could not apply for the health handbook. This process would be facilitated later on. And then it was in the late 90s when people that were outside of Japan, so foreign nationals, will be able to apply and obtain the atomic bomb certificate, the handbook, and then become eligible for the medical examinations. But so at the beginning, the 1977, when all this started, and there are indicated in the chart with the yellow line, all the people that obtained the examinations. So who were the people that took advantage of this process of the doctors coming to the United States and provide this kind of help? Not all of them obviously would take advantage of that, because some of them were able to travel to Japan and then do all the examinations over there. Others, they were never able to do that. They couldn't afford to do that. So when the examination started, it says that here in the line in the lighter green, it says, we had 325 survivors total. It's always been we historians, especially those of us that have been involved in this process, we have speculated that there were more than just the 500 or the 300 that had been available for the Oak Ridge National Laboratory Survey of 1974. We tend to say that there were probably between 1,200 and 1,500 atomic bomb survivors in the United States starting in 1977. So what this means is that when in 1971, the association CABS was established, there were that many, but not all of them will come forward for the reason that I've indicated before. So in a sense, this chart also mirrors the charts that I have looked at from the Radiation Effect Research Foundation and other organizations when it comes to how many atomic bomb survivors were out there in Japan. And so in Japan, the same thing happened. The number of survivors will increase, throughout the years. And that was because they would feel more comfortable in a way, or to come out and say that they needed help, that they needed medical help, and they wanted access to this programs. So in this chart, you see how the recipients of the medical examinations, it indicates how many were from the United States, how many would be from Hawaii. And I say from Hawaii, the medical examination started in 1981, and how many would be in Canada, in Vancouver. That's where the doctors will go for the medical examinations. So the total, as I indicated, was just like increasing steadily. At one point between 1991 and 2015, what we see is that they started gathering different kind of information. And so as you see here is that the offsprings within the children of the atomic bomb survivors were starting to be eligible for the medical examinations as well. This coincided with a lifespan survey that the Radiation Effect Research Foundation was actually carrying out in Japan, in both Hiroshima and Nagasaki as well. And so we have this kind of information. And what you see also appearing here from 1995 is the numbers of in utero survivors. So this kind of information reflects what the Radiation Effect Research Foundation, which is an organization that it's now run by the Japanese government with some American scientists on the board as well, the kind of information that they were gathering that will be helpful for their studies. Between 1979 and 1993, they also were looking at the nationality of these individuals. So there was another interesting set of data that I had access to. And so this provided just a different way of but they stopped doing this after 1993. I was discussing this issue with some of the doctors at the Hiroshima Prefecture Medical Association, trying to understand why, this would change at some point. In a way, it reflects the kind of questions or the kind of research that, they plan ahead of time and that they needed information on. The Radiation Effect Research Foundation has all his reports available on their website. But so the CABS, which was the Coalition of Atomic Bomb Survivors, was successful in enacting these medical examinations. But at some point, there was, as we're all humans, there was a disagreement as far as some of the bylaws of CABS, and the association split. The association split between the northern and southern California and Hawaii. And this is how the American Society of Hiroshima and Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Survivors was established. And the main difference, and this was around in 1991, the main difference, as you recall, the main goal of the CABS was the enactment of medical examinations or medical help to the survivors. One of the main goals of ASA is not only to keep carrying out and sponsoring the medical examinations, but peace education became one of the main goals of the organization. And since I joined the group, I've been involved in this process. One of the first presidents of the ASA was Miss Kaz Sueshi, which wanted to be called as Mama-san. She was instrumental in CABS for the establishing the medical examination, but Ms. Sueshi, especially from the 90s on, became the voice of the peace movement, and especially peace education here in the United States and also in Japan. She's been featured in several articles and news programs, and this is just a very short list of all the publications on her. But what Ms. Sueshi did, and this is according to an interview that I had with her daughter, is that her message of peace, in a sense, became more impactful after her grandkids came along. In the way she started, or the way she looked at the world changed. But Ms. Sueshi had been important in the work that she had carried out, but as her daughter said, as proud as she was about her work, she wouldn't take sole credit for all that was accomplished, and she always appreciated everyone's efforts. When Ms. Sueshi passed away in 2017, Mr. Junji Sarashina, which some of you got to meet at the beginning of this presentation, became the president of ASA. And Mr. Sarashina, he was born on January 29, 1929 in Lahaina, Maui. He moved to Japan in 1937 with mom and his siblings, and they moved to Hiroshima. His father was a Buddhist priest. It was known how Japanese nationals register with the local temples, would register with the local temples once they arrived in the country. So the FBI raided the temples looking for records of citizens in Hawaii. Mr. Sarashina's father was picked up on December 8, 1941 by the FBI, relocated to the mainland. And then because he was a Buddhist priest and he was considered someone of a higher status, and because of his connection, it was considered dangerous. And the FBI would relocate him, will move him every six months. But Mr. Sarashina was in Hiroshima on the day that the bomb was detonated. He was working in a factory about 3.5 kilometers south of the epicenter. He was part of the government student workforce. And nowadays, Mr. Sarashina conveys his experience with atomic bombing, and students always pay very close attention to what is that he conveys. What is for sure is that what he told me is that 72 years later, 76 years later, I cannot forget, for example, the sight of the little round bundle of black object, which was a child that was being cuddled by a dead mother. There are several, these individuals were all affected by what today we would call post-traumatic stress disorder. And so let's remember that these were conditions that doctors didn't know about back in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. At least they had not named it yet. But Mr. Sarashina, and this is how my research becomes a little bit more interesting, is only one of the many Japanese American survivors that after returning to the United States, they received the notice to go to Korea to fight for the Korean War. After all, they were American citizens. And Mr. Sarashina, like also Mr. Namba, first they were sent to Monterey to train as interpreter, Japanese and English interpreter, and then they were dispatched to Korea. So this is a different level of, this is another level of the research work that is converging in my narrative. But bringing it back to today's time, as a president of ASA, in this past 4 years, Mrs. Sarashina has been incredibly busy with attending public event, welcoming the doctors from Hiroshima, making sure that the grant that the association received from Cairo about bringing the survivors together for a day of company or shopping takes place. And so, for example, in 2017, when we sat down to trying to create a calendar of event for the 2018 and 2019 calendar year, we realized that it was going to be a very busy time, because 2019 was extremely busy for ASA. First of all, I'm sorry, in 2018, the American Society of Hiroshima and Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Survivors was recognized by the state of California and given an official certificate for the work that they had done in peace education and bringing and helping all the atomic bomb survivors that were in North America. And so this was an important accomplishment for ASA. But as I say, 2019 was probably the busiest year to memory. After every year, the organizations here in Southern California, and also in Northern California, we put together a commemoration event at Koyasan Buddhist Temple in Little Tokyo. At that time, in August 2019, we welcomed several individuals also from Japan, and also Barbara Reynolds' daughter, Jessica Renshaw. But at that time, we knew that we were going to be busy with the exhibit that was taking place at the Japanese American National Museum under a mushroom cloud, the Peace Forum that followed with Mr. Sarashina and Mr. Kakita, extremely busy giving their testimony and answering questions from the media and from the public. And also that same week, we had the doctors that were coming from Japan for the scheduled medical examination. So in a sense, as you look at the date, 2019 was extremely busy, and then 2020 came, and we had to reinvent, in a sense, the way that we would spread the message of peace to the people out there. But before we went on lockdown, I had the opportunity on February 22nd, 2020, to guide a group of high school students, junior high students from Orange County through the exhibit, Under a Mushroom Cloud, that was taking place at the Japanese American National Museum. This was a very emotional time for the people that attended, because children and grandchildren of the survivors were in attendance on that day. And so this is in a way to show you the kind of connections and that are among the survivors. Some of them knew each other from the very early days in Hiroshima, and the kind of gathering, the kind of connection has stayed throughout the years. So if we look at these pictures, for example, the younger individuals at the top are the grandchildren of the survivors, their friends. The boy is Mr. Wataru Namba's grandson. It would be the gentleman here in front of the atomic bomb dome. The one in the middle, Mr. Ernest Arai, the young girl here in the middle is his granddaughter. And then there's Emily Sarashina here on the right, Mr. Sarashina's granddaughter. So this individual, as I said, opened their homes and their hearts to me. I've been very fortunate and at the same time humbled by the kind of reception that I have had from all of them. As I say, these are just 3 of the pictures that I have, and there are hundreds that I could share. And as I say, I'm humbled by the fact that they wanted to share with me their experiences. And most important, they wanted this to be recorded and be put out there for everybody to know what it's like to be the victim of an atomic bomb. Some of the Japanese American survivors' testimony are, I'm sorry, before I get to that, the most active member right now is Mr. Howard Kakita. When I started interviewing Mr. Kakita, his experience brought in a different level of knowledge about Japanese American history. The reason being that although Mr. Kakita was in Japan at the time of the Hiroshima bombing, his parents were in the camps. And so I started exploring and trying to find all those survivors whose parents were interned in the camps here in the United States. And so when Mr. Kakita and his brother Kenny returned to the United States, and they all were all together, what it became peculiar to me was the fact that he shared with me that no one in the family talked about what they had experienced. And so you have here in one family some of the worst moment in world history, and you have people that experienced all of that. So some of the Japanese American eyewitness accounts and experience with atomic bomb are available online through the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museums in a program that they started in 2017, which is the recording of the Japanese American survivors, or sometimes the Japanese nationals that obtain American citizenship, but they have been residing in the United States for a long time. And they are available online with English subtitles if the interview is being conducted in Japanese. So you realize that there is a lot of information that I've given out, and it's not even, this is probably not even a fifth or whatever, a very small part of what my project and my research project is about. What I know is that every time that I talk with them, I learn something new. And so this is still a work in progress for me as learning is concerned. I'm working, trying to get this book published, hopefully by the end of 2022. As I say, this is just a very small part of the work that I've been conducting so far. And there is more that, of course, could be discussed. And if anybody would like to hear more, I'll be more than happy to make myself available and talk. And so as Alvin was saying at the beginning, and Dorothy as well, at this point, my presentation ends here. And I'm taking questions, and I can bring in the president of ASA, Mr. Sarashina, if he would like to add. I know there is a lot that can be added to my presentation, but for those of you that earlier did not hear his introduction of ASA, I don't see him. I don't know, Mr. Sarashina.
I'm here. I'm here.
Yes,
Oh,
go
here
ahead.
you are. Okay. All right. So thank you, everyone. Mr. Sarashina, if you want to introduce the association before, again, like you did before, so that it's recorded for the presentation.
Yes, we organize ASA, American Society of Hiroshima Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Survivor, in Los Angeles back in 1977. We split from CABS because they moved to San Francisco, and we had more members, A-bomb survivors in Los Angeles. Therefore, we thought it's better to establish our organization together with the people of Hawaii. Approximately 360 members joined the ASA. In Los Angeles, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, the members of the survivors will come to Los Angeles every other year to get the medical examination from the city of Hiroshima, prefecture of Hiroshima, prefecture of Nagasaki, to conduct a physical examination for the survivors. Our main goal is to take care the welfare of the atomic bomb survivors. We communicate, that is our secretary, Midori Seino, communicate with the Japanese government, the Japanese Hiroshima Medical Association, and of course with the city of Nagasaki. We have physical examination, as I mentioned, every other year. And in between, we go to Osato Clinic in Torrance, California, Los Angeles, to get the complete physical examination. Together with the Los Angeles Medical Association and with the Japanese medical doctors, approximately 10 of them will come from Japan. They will talk to the A-bomb survivors. This organization, together with Hawaii, is getting smaller and smaller. So because of their age, I'm almost 93 now. And we try our best to help the atomic bomb survivors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We can open, I guess, the floor for questions to Dr. Montebruno Saller. And again, you should see on the reactions, you should see the raise hand. So please use that raise hand and click on it. And that's we'll know how to call on you.
I would like, before we get there, I'd like to acknowledge also that the presence of the directors of the World Friendship Center in Hiroshima, Roger and Kathy Edmark. The World Friendship Center throughout the years has really sustained and supported the Japanese American atomic bomb survivors. And they've been incredible in their support. So the World Friendship Center was founded by Barbara Reynolds. And if you happen to be in Hiroshima, it's a place that you need to stop by and definitely visit. And I've had an incredible support from the World Friendship Center. So I want to acknowledge that as well. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Kathy, for being here today. Sorry, go ahead. Yes, questions.
Dorothy?
Okay, I just want to thank you for this wonderful presentation and also for what the members, for the Japanese Americans who are here and what they've done to educate us also on an aspect of American history that I knew very little about. And it's absolutely scandalous in my mind that the American government wouldn't help people who were the victims of its own bomb. But I guess that's neither, that's humanity, I guess. Anyway, and the other thing I was going to say is that you will have to unmute yourself when you wish to speak, because I could mute everybody, but I can't unmute you.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. I don't see any other hands up, but I will ask a question myself again. One of the things that's very surprising to me is you would have thought that the United States government, and even the military, would have been very, very interested in understanding better the impact of radiation on a group of people who are the only ones who actually survived a nuclear explosion. And it seems like almost obvious that this is something they would want to learn a lot about. So it's surprising to me that they wouldn't have gone out of their way to accommodate the group and try to give them all the medical attention, because that would also give them the opportunity to understand all of those things better.
Well, the argument is that, first of all, there was a lot that the military knew. And I've read a lot recently about, the actions of General Groves, which in a way he monopolized even the public relations information that was going to put out there. So, for example, the New York Times at the time was, a puppet in the hands of General Groves, and all the information that was being released in the media about radiation. It was an Australian journalist that put out the first article in the Daily News in London about the radiation in Hiroshima in the mid-September 1945. And he was immediately kicked out of Japan. His camera was taken away and he was banned. But the thing is that there were different levels of, who knew what. So General Warren, which was the doctor in charge of the program, he had pointed out the presence of radiation at, on ground zero. They knew about residual radiation already. They knew about initial radiation, residual radiation, induced radiation. They knew about all of that. When it came to the congressional hearings, the argument that they used, I remember this is in 1978, was that it was an act of war. So the concern was that it was an act of war. Then if we give them something, then we're going to have to give the Germans something. We have to give, the Italians something. Wherever we drop the bomb, someone is going to come out and they will want something. Because what is interesting is that we have here in the United States what are called the atomic, the military veteran, atomic veteran, and we have the downwinders. And those individuals were given some medical aid, but because they attended, for example, the military, they were the ones that were in the Marshall Islands during the nuclear testing. All the military personnel that went through Nevada, over 1,000 nuclear detonations that happened in the Nevada desert. So those were able to obtain something, but in the 1995. So because those were not acts of war, and so they could have access to that. But in 1945, for example, Trinity, the experiment, the first nuclear detonation was done conducted before, Hiroshima. The people that were affected by the downwinders of Trinity, they weren't able to obtain anything until the 1960s. Their lawsuit was dismissed. They say that wasn't true. There was no radiation. I mean, I think that the interesting thing about, this thing about radiation was that when General Groves was really trying to control the media about the effect of radiation, Oppenheimer's and other of the scientists went back to the location of Trinity, and they had a photo op, right? Say, see, we're here, nothing is happening. But what they're shown with covers over their shoes and their boots. So yes, they did know that it was residual radiation. They were very well aware of that. But it took a long time before this information could come out.
Thank you. Ken Krause? You have to unmute yourself, Ken.
I know, that's what I was doing. After the war, as Gloria was saying, the Army ordered soldiers to witness nuclear tests and then march to ground zero. And it took, but up until 1995 for them to admit they knew what they were doing. And of course, they were doing it to see what the effect would be on them. I mean, it was really kind of horrible. So this is a really off-the-wall kind of question, Gloria, but sure. I'm gonna ask you about this. Okay. I know from my own research that there was in Lithuania a consul, Japanese consul, who issued hundreds, if not thousands, of passes for Jews trying to escape the Nazis. And many of them were able to flee, and some of them actually fled to Japan.
Oh.
And I'm wondering if any of those were in somehow, were connected to the bombings in Nagasaki and Hiroshima, if they were victims or witnessed it or something like that.
I never heard of it. I'm gonna look into it now because that's definitely interesting. I will look into that. This is the first that I hear.
The consul was named Chiune Sugihara, okay. And he actually was withdrawn by the Japanese government because he was giving out too many passes to Jews, and was eventually shamed in Japan and drummed out of the diplomatic service. And it wasn't until 1985 that Israel recognized him as one of the righteous heroes who had, saved so many lives. And the man died the next year. So, I mean, it was a very sad story. So anyway, that's all.
Thank you.
Jill?
Yes.
Unmute yourself, Jill.
I'm muting myself, yes. Okay, thanks. Well, this is not so much a question as a statement, but I would also like to see if I can form it as a question also. But it just it never ceases to amaze me that that the Japanese people and be so forgiving. There seems to be no feelings of recrimination or anger, and I'm wondering how difficult that has been through the generations to forgive. It's just simply amazing. I marvel also at the Vietnamese for the same reason, but I have just once been to Japan, and people were so kind, and everybody is just so kind, and this was so outrageous. So I wonder what you think about that.
Well, I can't speak of the Japanese American survivors, but I had this conversation with the Japanese survivors in Hiroshima. And there are different approaches. First of all, the Japanese, some of the survivors in Japan, they were not angry at the American government, they were angry at their own government. And so they say this happened because the Japanese didn't surrender when they were supposed to. And so that was the biggest group of individuals at the time. And you can still hear some of this still resonates. I say when we went through it, it wasn't because of the Americans, it was because of people in Tokyo that they did not surrender when they were asked to surrender. I did encounter Japanese survivors that will still be angry and will hold a grudge against the United States, and they were the most vocal. And they wouldn't even engage at that point with Americans that visit the city or things like that. So I did not have this conversation with in a sense, your question is what I was asking myself from the very beginning, is like, had they known, in the decision room, wherever was making the decision, had they known that there were American civilians on the ground, would they have dropped it? Would they have done the same? Because, the thing is, if you think about the survivors in Nagasaki, the bomb was dropped and detonated over an area where the majority of Christians lived. And so when you talk to them, they say, we're Christians. Why did they pick us? Why did they do it here? Although, there was an error in the way the bomb was detonated on Nagasaki. It missed its mark by about 2 kilometers. So it happened to explode over Urakami, which was the section that housed the most, not only Christian Catholics in the region. So there is some of that going on as well. I say for the Japanese Americans that I interviewed, they were children. So I'm not sure that, and I don't know if later on that would have been an issue or not. That's the best I can do.
Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any more questions? I don't see hands raised, but please do, if you can. I would make a comment about what you just said, Gloria, because to me, just from looking at the way the Japanese were interred, American citizens were interred, tells you what the mood in America was, and also what the prejudicial attitude was. So I don't know the answer, just like you don't. But if I were to suspect, my guess would be that if they knew there were Japanese American citizens in Hiroshima, that would not have made a difference. And that's the way the Americans were thinking at that time.
Yeah, and that's my conclusion. That's what I've come to after, learning so much and reading so much. I reached the same conclusion. It would have not mattered. It would have not mattered. I also think that as I showed earlier in the presentation, it would have not mattered even if they weren't a Japanese American, even if they were Caucasian American. This toy had to be used. The price tag in 1945 was $3 billion. So that was the price tag. So they knew they had 2.5 because, the third one was never used. It was dismantled. It was an expensive toy. General Groves had to justify. So I am with the school of thought that it had to be used because at the congressional hearings that took place then in November 1945, they would have asked for a statement. How did you spend this money? And so, we all are aware as historians of all the different narratives around why it was dropped, what was the reason for it. And it was going to be used. There was no doubt that I believe that certain targets were spared, like, the city of Hiroshima, because geographically was the best in a sense. And then Nagasaki just happened to be visible to the naked eye in that morning, sort of, because Kokura was totally cloudy. I think that as an historian, as a Japanese historian, I always, I'm horrified when I read about General Grove's decision of wanting to drop it on the city of Kyoto. And so that would have been just, I don't know, it's just strange things, but they would have dropped it regardless of, because it was an expensive toy and the scientists behind it, they had to see if it worked. So, I mean, even Oppenheimer at the beginning was totally dismissing the radiation issue, which is absurd. I see that.
Yeah, that's Willard.
Willard?
Go ahead,
Okay.
Willard.
Yes, I seem to recall that there were conventional bombings of in Japan, maybe the city of Tokyo, I don't know, but somewhere, that were just about as destructive in terms of loss of life and property as the nuclear bombs, but it involved hundreds of bombers instead of only one. Is that
Yeah, well,
correct?
yes, Tokyo was firebombed in March 1945, and it took 3 weeks to kill about 300,000 people. The thing is that in Hiroshima, in less than 1 second, 75,000 people were pulverized. So it would have taken the equivalent of 4,000 bombers to drop as many bombs to kill as many people in Hiroshima. So yeah, the firebombing in itself, was as unethical as it gets, but it took 3 weeks to do that. Yeah.
Okay, Barbara?
I just had a little bit of adjunct information. We have something in San Diego called One Book, One San Diego, and our book, the year just ended in August, and they called us Enemy by George Takei. And my book club read that. I was actually responsible for reading the group, so had to do a lot of research on it. But if anyone's interested in following up on what was going on here in this country, they can get an ebook or a hard copy book from our local libraries, and it's very, very worthwhile reading what people in this country went through during the war.
I'm sorry, Barbara, is that Were We the Enemy by Professor?
No, they call us Enemy.
They called us Enemy, so it's a
They
different.
call us Enemy by
Okay.
George Takei, who is the
Oh,
well-known actor from Star Wars. His family was interned and he was there as a child.
Well, George Takei was very helpful. He helped the survivors in the Southern California area. And I actually think that in one of the pictures I showed you, he is in one of those pictures. So yeah, I'll look this one up. Thank you.
Mrs. Sarashina?
Yes, I have a statement to make. Back in 1945, August 6th, when the bomb was dropped, I was there approximately 2 miles away. And I tried to go into the city that particular day, but so many mass of people trying to evacuate the city of Hiroshima. Of course, the whole city was burning, smoking, and I couldn't go into the town of the city of Hiroshima. The following day, August 7th, I crossed the river and went into the city of Hiroshima. In fact, I got to my high school, old high school, approximately half a mile from the hypocenter. About 300 lower grade students burned, dead, died, evaporated. Why did I go into the city of Hiroshima, half a mile away from the hypocenter? I didn't know, and I wasn't told, and nobody knew anything about radiation. My guess is about a month later, I heard this thing called radiation, because many people entered the city of Hiroshima to look for their loved one or look for their husband not coming home. And day after day, they went into the city. After a month or so, they all lost their hair. And that is when I heard about this thing called radiation effect, radiation sickness. And to tell you the truth, majority of the people of Hiroshima didn't know anything about radiation for a month or so. I just want to add a statement to the word called radiation and radiation sickness. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would like to just say that a recording of this talk will be available on the website of the San Diego Independent Scholars. I didn't think to bring this website link with me, but if anyone, if you are a member of the San Diego Independent Scholars or one of the people that Gloria Amanda Bruno Saller invited, we'll make sure that you get it. If not, you can send an email to our Gmail site, which is on our website. Our website is easy to find, sdscholars.org. And on that, our Gmail is the full name of our organization, all typed together without any punctuation or any spaces, San Diego Independent Scholars @gmail.com. And if you send a message there, I will make sure that you get the link to this and pass it on to your friends.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If not, let's thank our speaker. And again,
Thank you. Thank you.
thank all our honored guests for being here. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. And it was a very, very informative. We learned a great deal today.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.